I'm extremely excited to announce a brand new sponsor for the Behind the Shield podcast, and that is Rescue One CBD. For any of you who have listened to this podcast for the last 8 years, you would have heard my own personal journey from using prescription pills after a knee surgery to finding CBD and having incredible success with that. I then saw my son's wheezing diminish, my wife's anxiety, and so many more kind of success stories. The problem is, though, I've also seen the stigma and misunderstanding about this incredibly powerful plant medicine. When it comes to workplace drug testing, it's THC that they are looking for. The concentration is high in marijuana, but there is a small amount in most CBD products. And with John being a veteran firefighter paramedic himself, he was determined to find a product that was pure, that would ensure there was nothing in there that would put someone's career at risk. So he developed a 3-tier system. The third-party testing facility tests to parts per billion, which is the most minute amount I have ever heard of in all the time I've worked with CBD. The results of every batch are posted on their website, so you can literally see the same results that they see from the batch that you are ordering. Secondly, they include workplace drug test kits in the order when you order it. So if you have any fears, you get to do it just to appease it, even though this is a pure and safe product. Thirdly, they've just finished a year-long study with the University of Maryland and Arcadia University, and firefighters from all over the country sent in their urine samples, and not a single person failed a drug test. So you have 3 different tiers of trust with this particular product. Now, they have different flavors for their CBD. For anyone that's had it, that's just the CBD oil. It does not taste good, so they found a way of making it more palatable. They have a sleep remedy that has terpenes in, again, completely safe. That one's called Out of Service. And then topical CBD, obviously, for aches and pains on the outside. Now, on top of all that, Rescue One is offering you, the listener of the Behind the Shield podcast, 15% off your order if you use the code BTS, as in Behind the Shield. And you can find all of their products, you can find all of the testing and understand why this truly is a product that you can trust by going to rescue1cbd.com. And you can listen to my conversation with John on episode 1011 of the Behind the Shield podcast. This episode is sponsored by Team Builder, yet another company that's doing great things for the first responder community. As a strength and conditioning coach myself who also trains tactical athletes, dissemination of wellness information is one of the biggest challenges. Now, Team Builder is the premier strength and conditioning software for tactical athletes, and there are several features that really impress me. Firstly, there is a full exercise library, so you, the personal trainer, does not have to create that within your own department. Secondly, you can send out programming, but also individualize, which I love. So you blanket program for everyone. Now you can tweak based on someone's injury, someone's need to maybe drop some body composition, rather than having to write a program for every single person on their own. Team Builder also allows you to build custom questionnaires to collate health and wellness data. It integrates with wearables. And I think one of the most important things is obviously it tracks. To me, it's imperative that we as a profession start tracking our people from day one and then over the full span of their career, therefore catching potential wellness issues and injuries before they happen. Now, if you want to try Team Builder, they are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, a free 14-day trial to experience all of the features. And if you want to take a deeper dive into Team Builder, listen to episode 1032 with Melissa Mercado, or go to teambuilder.com. And I'll spell that to you because it's not as you'd think, TEAMBUILDR.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show firefighters Geoff Lassers and Mike Mattern, and licensed social worker Manisha Leary. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from their respective journeys into their fields, the rebirth that Detroit is seeing, the mental health crisis in Michigan, Frontline Strong Together, the program between the state of Michigan and Wayne State University to provide mental health resources to their first responders, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,000 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Geoff Lassers, Mike Mattern, and Manisha Leary. Enjoy. Well, Mike, Geoff, and Manisha, I want to welcome you all onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
It's kind of a big deal for us. Thanks for having us.
It is.
Well, likewise, I was on your Minds at the Frontline podcast not too long ago, so I want to thank you for that. Very first question, let's start with Mike and Geoff, because I know you're in two different locations. So Mike and Geoff, where are we finding you this afternoon?
We are in downtown Detroit. We're actually at the Wayne State University in the heart of downtown Detroit in our podcast studio.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you look out the window, you can see Ford Field, the Rensen, the river, Comerica Park. You can literally, we have the view of Detroit. It's pretty iconic. Beautiful. And Manisha, what about you?
I'm still in Michigan. I'm not, and my view is not as scenic as the guys, but I'm a few miles away, still in Michigan, enjoying our cold and snowy day today. So
beautiful.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I won't. Nothing's on fire, but it's pretty cold out there.
Yeah, I won't show you outside my window. It'll break your heart. All right. Well, let's start at the very beginning. There's three of you, so I want to kind of just get the timelines of each of you into your chosen professions, and then there'll definitely be an intersection of how you all met. So, Geoff, let's start with you. Tell me where you were born, and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
You got it. So I was born in Dearborn, Michigan, actually, which is right next to Detroit. My mom was a Michigander. My dad lived in about 10 different states, maybe even more than that, before he was even 18. He's originally from Illinois, Chicago area, where most of his family's from. And then he moved to the Detroit area in the late 70s, early 80s, back when there was a whole lot of jobs to be had in the Detroit area for the computer and engineering type human beings. My mother worked for General Motors, so that's about as Detroit as it could possibly get. One of my parents worked for GM in the Big Three, and the other one worked for a subsidiary of the Big Three. And so I wasn't around any first responders. Nobody was really military in my family other than a grandfather who served in World War II. And so service or public service wasn't really a thing other than becoming a lawyer or even a judge in my family. So I had this weird thing that I always felt different than other my family members. My one brother is an engineer. My dad had his master's in business, uncles with PhDs. It wasn't me. I wasn't really a school kid, and everybody kind of knew it, even though they really wanted me to be. So after an attempt at a university, at Western Michigan University, I finally pulled the trigger and said, I can't do this. I've always been thinking about being a firefighter. I've always wanted to be a firefighter since I was 6 years old. And it always kind of felt like a pipe dream just based on how my cultural upbringing was. The expectation was degrees, wear a suit, those type of white collar dreams that your mom has for you doing real well, right? Well, it didn't fit the mold. And then when I entered that world and finally dove in, I became a straight A student. I was early to everything. My life came together weird. And the real me kind of showed up. But one of the big events that solidified it for me is when I was a little kid. My dad, when I grew up with my father, and he passed away when he was 57 years old. And that was about 12 years ago. He was very brittle diabetic, but he was the most compliant diabetic you've ever met. He swam a mile every day. His diet was perfect. He checked his blood sugar a million times. He was dialed in. Even then, that disease is very, very hard. He had it since he was about 17 years old. But there was a couple of times where I'd have to call 911 because I couldn't get him out of it. I couldn't get him to drink any sugar, get him to eat anything. And it got to a point where my skills of talking him down for the 100th time wasn't working. And so 911 would need to show up. And that camaraderie, that team that would show up, take care of business, be my friend for that short amount of time, and leave with everything good, left a massive impression on me. And I'll never forget those guys. And that's here we are today.
So just to clarify, your dad was a type 1 diabetic?
Yes. Yeah. He got late onset juvenile diabetes. So he was 17 years old. He was a little bit overweight, but it wasn't linked to that. His mother was also a type 1 diabetic. And then he caught the genetic bullet as well. Luckily, my brother and I have avoided it.
Yeah, that's so sad. I mean, if you think about what you just said and how we hear most type 1 diabetics and the diligence that they take, it's almost haunting because type 2 obviously is, nearly always diet related, and it's kind of the polar opposite. It's a disregard of all that diligence that a type 1 diabetic shows.
Yeah, I get a little stuck in my craw a little bit when I see people abusing their bodies like this. It's like, man, do you know how many people wish had all their parts working and you're just doing this?
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
but it is.
No, it's sad. I think that I don't know if it was real, if it was Photoshop, but I remember seeing, I forget which fast food company it was, Subway or something like that, and their soda, if you bought the soda, then they made a contribution to the American Diabetes Association. I think if that was true, then that explains, that's the perfect analogy for what's broken in this country.
There you go.
Well, staying on Detroit for a moment, I think especially with the opioid crisis and seeing the predatory actions of those companies preying, like Purdue preying on areas where there was thriving industry and then there was a void. And then we see obviously the mental health kind of domino effect after that. What have you heard as far as your parents' story of thriving Detroit and then the lack of industry and the impact on their community?
I think guys like Mike and I, we grew up right next to Detroit. Him closer to me. He grew up in Dearborn, which is right next to it. I grew up in Livonia, which is a stone's throw away from Dearborn, just on their side, basically. And growing up in the 90s, first of all, we had the Detroit Red Wings, right? So I was downtown all the time going to hockey games, Joe Louis Arena, Tiger Stadium. My neighbor was the groundskeeper for the old Tiger Stadium. So I was always downtown. It was awesome. So downtown to me was always this cool place that used to be one of the biggest metropolises in the world. In the history of the world, Detroit was at one time one of the biggest metropolises. And then to see the shell of it in those late 80s, 90s was a ghost town. And you heard all the stories and it's dangerous and it's this and that. And this is a very big city, so not every area is the same. And so when my dad came to Detroit, we'd drive downtown. He's like, see this place right here? It was all open, thriving stores and office buildings and this and that. And it's parking as far as you can see. Mm-hmm. There's nobody there.
Yeah.
And so you got this crazy shell with this amazing architecture, this lost Gothic mid-century architecture, this beautiful town.
Beautiful churches.
The ballroom type houses, this forgotten history, and then what happened for a while. But the good news is Detroit's been on the upswing for the last 10 years. And just walking around this area is so beautiful. The restaurants, I will put up downtown Detroit restaurants up against top 25 in the U.S. We got awesome stuff to do. It's beautiful. So we hope to get it back to where it was. It was like the third wealthiest city in the world at one time. I don't think we're going to get quite there. But it would be nice to have this vibrant place and community that takes advantage of its natural landscapes and the things we already built here.
And there's a lot of people reinvesting in the city. That's the nice part is it's really coming back like you talked about, but there's people willing to reinvest in the city. And that's really where we're seeing that comeback of the city.
Yes.
Well, Manisha, just your perspective, what have you heard? Obviously, you're treating a lot of people with, origin stories, and you've got your own observation as well, living close to Detroit. What have you heard and or observation or from your family as far as that thriving element, the kind of decline, and then hopefully again this kind of upward swing that you're seeing too?
Yeah, so I think for the city of Detroit, in the time that we kind of like lost its luster and even the surrounding areas around the city during the drugs, the opioid, cocaine, heroin, meth, like all of the things that have plagued our city. I think the state as a whole kind of suffered when the big city suffered. So, and I think when it comes around to not necessarily putting the two together, a lot of people like to separate what's happening with the economy or what's happening with our society, and kind of separate the people from that. You can't do it. It's hard to do that. So I know a lot of people, what they see on the news and what they hear on the news in these different places, there's people living these lives. There's people struggling through these economies and being, losing houses, losing jobs when the economy was bad, when the depression was bad. All of this left people with living in fight or flight mode and feeling like they had to survive a place that they once thrived in. And I think overall that just talks to how mental health has always kind of been a thing. And I think back then people really didn't want to talk about it because it was a sign of weakness. And what we're seeing now coming with the city thriving over the last, 10 years or so, and people learning more about how to reach out and who to reach out to, I think we're in a space of people being a little bit more open to talking about things and to addressing things, and being more communicative about things that they're struggling with, which we didn't see that a long time ago. So I guess the moral of it is that, the people are a reflection of the city. And so I think that when you see your people starting to do good and to being out and riding their bikes and being by the riverfront and enjoying the restaurants and doing all these things, that revitalizes the city. And so
you see people, I think, owning Detroit again.
Absolutely.
In a way that we have never seen before. It used to be like very segregated racially, like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in an area where there wasn't people being as kind about the racial segregation that existed in a not so spoken objective way. But now it's like everybody just owns Detroit. Like you literally go down and the internet, it's so nice now compared to what we saw in the past, especially through like the 2008 and the big recession. And it was bad for a while.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I had author Sam Quinones on the show for the second time, and he wrote Dreamland, and that followed the city of Portsmouth, Ohio, and what initially was OxyContin, then into the black tar heroin from Mexico. And Dreamland was this community pool, outdoor pool that they had. And as the city of Portsmouth declined, it was closed down. But the whole point was when, as you said, when the city was thriving, communities were coming together, again, of all colors and creeds, swimming and lying out in the grass. But what was interesting in the second interview, which was a few years later, Sam said that Portsmouth has now become a hub for recovery. So now you've got all these gentrification is the wrong word, but kind of reinvesting in the area, and stores and restaurants and barbershops are opening up again, and people are coming to Portsmouth from other parts of Ohio to get clean. So I really believe in, I think hope is just the word that we need in society, full stop. But I really feel like, we were in a low, and I think the fire service, we are in a low right now. And it was funny what Manisha said, your people are a reflection of how well your city is doing. I would argue your people are a reflection of how well your fire department or your leadership is doing. If they're dying and leaving, maybe it's not doing so well. But I think that's also a beautiful opportunity to finally let that pendulum swing back the other way and start healing.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, Geoff, to you, same question. Where were you born? What did your parents do? How many siblings?
I think you mean Mike.
Oh, sorry, Mike.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I was born in Dearborn, Michigan. My parents, my mom was a school secretary, actually a couple of the schools that I went to. So I had to keep my nose clean. My dad worked at Granger for 30 years. And then I got an older sister who is a nurse out at U of M Mott Children's Hospital in the NICU. I literally was born knowing I wanted to be a firefighter. There was nothing else in this world that I ever had any idea what I wanted to do. It was just be a firefighter. And even when I got old enough and I learned my uncle was a firefighter, that was like having him in the family was awesome because I could, every year for my birthday, I would go to the firehouse. That was like my trip for the birthday, those types of things. And it's kind of cool now because the firehouses that I used to go to as a kid are the ones that I work in now. So I grew up in this department. I grew up, in the city. And it was one of those things, knowing what I wanted to do early on in my life, it made the trajectory that much easier. So like my senior year of high school, I took college classes so that I could jump right into EMT the day I graduated. So I got my EMT license when I was 18. I got my medic when I was 19 and went through fire academy, was out ready to go at age 20. Ended up getting hired month or two after I turned 21 and just been in the fire service since.
Yeah, Mike and I did about the same time. I started 2004. You were like, what, 06, 08?
06. Yep.
I started 2004 as well. So how competitive was recruitment back then for you two?
Oh my gosh. It was, where I got hired, I remember there was over 200 people who applied for 6 positions.
Yeah.
And
it was a pretty good shot. 200 is pretty good for 6 back then. We were seeing 1,000 for none because they just need to make a list.
And the funny part was, you were applying at every city that you could apply to, and we were running in. you're running into people.
You're making friends
at all the
with the
interviews.
same guys.
How'd that interview go in this city? And because we're all fighting for the same crumbs. Yeah. And the process was insane. If you didn't have a high test score, they weren't even looking at you. If you didn't have a 98, yeah. And so the recruitment, there wasn't a recruitment. They didn't go looking for you.
The recruitment was the availability of the job.
Yes.
The retention was the pay. And, if you look at what we were making in 2004 compared to now, and you compare that to the economics, I don't think I've gotten a raise at all. From 2004 to 2008, we know what happened. And then they try to come back. And I don't know if you Michigan politics and economics during that time, we had a governor named Schneider that tore us apart and led to a lot of financial crisis here.
A lot of benefits being.
Yeah. Not to mention Flint and everything else, where, it's a much different thing now. So weird how the competitive nature for getting the job went down, where we're hiring people without even Fire 1 and 2 anymore. Like, that's amazing. We're paying somebody to go to the fire academy. Good for them. I'm not trying to talk bad about it. It's great for the new employee, but it's weird. It's weird.
It's odd because it was tooth and nail. You were fighting people for jobs.
Yeah. Studying, the amount of studying I was doing. And then you had to worry about the psychology test. You're doing 1,200 questions on, do you see spirits in doorknobs? Or do you ever feel like there's a tight band around your head? Have you ever slept in a bed with your mother?
There's some weird questions.
Who's a better president, Jefferson or Washington, and why? And I'm like, what are you doing to me?
Yeah.
It was insane. Well, Manisha, I think if I'm not mistaken, the one that we took, Hialeah, we literally took at least 1,500 questions, and it was exactly that. Do you like puppies? Do you like flowers? Do you like the ocean? Do you like touching kids? Do you like cooking? Whoa, what was that last one? And you're like, after an hour, you're cross-eyed. But I think that was the MMPI, multiphasic Minnesota.
Yeah, the Minnesota multiphasic.
Yes, that's the one.
Inventory.
So let's put that to Manisha for a second, because I'm curious. So far, I don't want to skew your answer, but so far, the psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors that have been on the show have all said that test was never designed to be a standalone test to decide if someone should be a first responder or not. What is your perspective?
It's not. It wasn't designed to be the standalone test. And it's really designed to give you a here and now of kind of like emotional space. But really, it's designed to be with other tests in another space. And so I don't know, to be honest, what was the reason that the states chose to use that as the psychological test or the, mental health test. I'm not sure what the reason was behind that. But what I will say is that the people who were seeing the scores probably wasn't the ones who should have been getting the scores. So I wonder how many people really passed it or really didn't pass it, because because I can't imagine someone without having the proper background kind of scoring it and being like, yeah, this person is good versus this person isn't. So that's just what I think. I think that the process really should be, meeting with someone face to face, kind of having this kind of conversation, doing what I call a biopsychosocial, which is getting a full history of, childhood, where you are now, how you handle things now, why you're in this field. I think having something like that would do a little bit better job at vetting versus, someone having taken this test that isn't going to tell someone who doesn't know how to score much.
Absolutely. So, yeah, it's funny because I did the polygraph, 3 of the 4. I had to lie my way through with those because that's just smoke and mirrors and magic show. It's not anything that's actually, true science. And then it's funny, I wrote my second book and just came out last year. And there's one chapter and it's totally based on my experience in Orange County with that face-to-face counselor. Literally, it was like a pack rat's office. She had to move papers off the couch for me to even sit down. And I'm just sitting there going, and I'm being psychologically evaluated, so this is the problem is, lowest bid and all that. Even the face-to-face, who is that person that's actually vetting that young candidate? And do they have the ability to actually determine if they would be a good cop, firefighter, or paramedic, or are they battling their own demons and maybe should go see some counseling first?
Yeah. Or even if they have experience with working with these people or have experiencing understanding what it means to be a firefighter, police officer, EMS, like any of these different disciplines, I think that's important as well. You don't want to have someone who spent their life being a therapist for divorced couples, right? Marriage counseling is great. That's perfect. There's a lane for that. But I wouldn't necessarily pull that person in to work with my police officer or firefighter because that person doesn't have the experience needed to work with that type of a client as well. So I think a lot goes into that. And I mean, we know there, cities and departments have to do what they can do with the money that they're given. But I think if you want to have healthier members who are making it to their 25 and out, 30 and out, and then thriving in retirement as well, you have to do your due diligence when you're bringing in people to be a part of like these systems for hiring, these systems for your EAPs and things like that. It's super important.
Absolutely. Well, going back to Mike and Geoff, when we're talking about recruitment and the comparison, because this whole thing is just to show the lens of where we were, where we are now, what went wrong, what can we change. But I haven't had a person yet that said anything other than our recruitment is pales in comparison to how it used to be. When you look at not only your recruitment, but retention in your departments, what has changed versus 20 years ago when arguably I would imagine most people will go in full career and then take in their pension?
Well, you can start.
Yeah, I think the number one thing is when I got hired, my assistant chief, I remember, his name was Ray Riggs. He shook my hand and said, "Welcome to the best job in the world." And he meant it in the fact of you had this good paying job that was reliable that you were going to have fun with. You were literally going to have fun with. Yes. Is there a dangerous aspect? Absolutely. But you're going to have a good time, right? That was the whole, it's going to be fun. You got with your buddies, you get to help people, and then, fast forward, that's 2004. And then probably within 10 years, you're starting to see cracks. And I don't know if that's the 7 to 10 year itch you see on some guys when they feel ignored in the department and they're not being utilized enough for something, this or that. But then after a while, when we eventually got a 2-tier system, because the economics of our department completely changed, all of a sudden we have 2 different contracts and another one doesn't look as appealing to do your whole 25 to 30.
So 2-tier being just fire or just EMS?
Nope, 2-tier being one contract if you got hired before this date and a whole different contract if you got hired after this date.
Gotcha.
So we're talking a difference in healthcare, a difference in retirement, all the different things.
Mostly a decrease.
None of it's an increase.
Yes.
None of it's better.
The new tier was always a decrease of that.
Because of the legacy costs, yada, 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 which really speaks to the inability to manage finances at a municipal level on many different fronts. That's a whole different conversation based on every different.
So the bottom tier, though, they run less calls and get more time off. Oh, they don't?
No,
so they do the same exact job for worse money?
Same exact job.
Sometimes doing
Yeah.
more in a sense, and then sometimes doing less depending on the scope of their abilities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think another part of it is, and this is not just here, I think it's fire service in general. A lot of places, it's turned into a business. It's not, we start looking at
chiefs have become managers of a business.
Yeah. Whereas before it was kind of the old, this was a career. This was a certain type of career that you did. And, I think some of it has turned more towards that. And the focus is more on, budget lines and how much does this cost and, that versus this. Whereas before, you needed something, boom, you got it.
Yeah.
There wasn't the budget constraints and those types of things. You didn't feel like a number you actually felt like a member of the department. Whereas over the years, because of budgets and taking benefits and all this other stuff, you really kind of started, a lot of people started feeling a lot like I'm just a number on a budget line.
The do more with less became like our mantra. And
Yes.
It's just like, how much more can we do more with less while you're giving me death by 1,000 cuts at the same time?
See, what's so interesting, and I had Tulsi Gabbard on the show, and we talked about this. I am not an intelligent man. I never rose above the rank of firefighter. And yet it seems so painfully obvious to me that there is a false economy in so many things that we see, especially in the fire service, but even nationally. We could have a national healthcare system if we focused on getting Americans healthy, then it wouldn't cost us a lot. But if, as we touched on at the beginning of the interview, obesity is normalized and so is type 2 diabetes and all the other things, and our kids are being served crap in schools and PE is being, cut, and, urban kids don't even have anywhere to exercise because if there is a place, it's probably ridden with gangs and, all these things that are fixable and reversible, then, that, of course, healthcare is going to become hard to fund. In the fire service, what I see is when people, and I love it when they say we're a business, because we're not. We're a service, and the job hasn't changed. That was my sarcastic comment with the 2-tier. The job is the job. Your call comes in, you get on the rig, you respond, fire, extrication, rope rescue, EMS, whatever it is, jack of all trades, master of none. And that is what we all signed up for. That's what we train for in the academy. The working environment under which we work is a completely different conversation. And, as one of my friends actually in your area pointed out, when you've got one department that works 56 hours a week, another one that works 42, like a lot of the Northeast, you're basically telling them you're worth 1/3 less than Boston. Same job, same calls, but you don't deserve to have what they have. And so when you look at even the corporate space, is what makes me laugh when people say we're a business. Well, if you look at the progressive business leaders, they invest in their people. Look at the Googles and Virgins and all these, high-level businesses. A lot of the corporations now are going to 4-day work weeks, 4 9-hour day work weeks, finding the same productivity, more innovation, efficiency, and a happier workforce. So if we truly are a business, as I always say snarkily, then why are we modeling an Indonesian sweatshop instead of a progressive business? If you're a real business leader, you would be looking at investing in your people. And the result of poor investment costs 10 times more in workman's comp claims, lawsuits from accidents, overtime, the line of duty death payments, medical retirements. I could go on and on and on. So the money is there. This is what drives me crazy. It's just the leadership isn't.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And, to Jeff's point, where you're talking about, we're doing more with less. People are getting burnt out in the career.
Yeah.
You just get burnt out. It takes years off your career when you're running short. The calls aren't going to stop coming in, but you're doing more with less. And people are starting to look at the career like, why am I doing this?
So when we started and you said, hey, do you love your job? You're yeah, dude, good luck getting a job. Now I've literally seen professional firefighters talk kids out of becoming firefighters. Mm-hmm. Talk them out of it. Mm-hmm. Like, you're not going to like it. This is that, the other thing. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. Go be a welder. Go be an electrician. Go do this. You own your own life. They're literally telling them to go away.
I just shared an article on the New York Times article, and it was saying that Gen Z are actually turning to trades, because you got to remember, this is a generation raised on information. This is why we have a recruitment crisis. When the three of us were going, I want to be a firefighter, we're just thinking about cats and trees, sooty faces, and the front page holding a baby. Now, fast
Yep.
forward 20 years, now these young people who are much more in tune, and kudos to our generation for finally dragging this mental health conversation out into the open. So our children are being raised with CrossFit and Spartan races, so their physicality, the fit ones are extremely fit. There's mental health conversations. There's a leaning back into the value of relationships and family. And so then that same lens goes and looks at, Detroit, Orange County, whoever it is, and they're like, oh, 56 hours a week, mandatory overtime makes it 80 hours a week. Salary is only this. The pension used to be good, but the governor cut it, so now it's only here. And then they look at welding or working for Amazon or whatever, and they're like, I want to serve, but that just sounds awful, so I'm going to go do this. So what's crazy is we have a young group of people that would be phenomenal firefighters, dispatchers, who, whatever the gig. We need to now fix what's broken in the working environment so that we can once again have hundreds, if not thousands of people lining up. Because as all my special forces guests say, when they're overseas, we're the ones protecting their family, and they hold us to that same level. A lot of people try and be Navy SEALs and SAS and Delta, and that's because they want to find the best of the best. If we're taking anyone 18 in a heartbeat, imagine the catastrophic events that would happen with that lower bar. God forbid you have a 10-story high-rise fire or, a school shooting. And as we saw, sadly, in Uvalde, your child dies because you allowed some politician or cowardly leader break down your department. So, as I said, being optimistic as I am, this crisis is the perfect opportunity to finally turn it around. Because if we don't change it, Detroit might not have a fire department. Orlando might not have a fire department. So we can turn tragedy into triumph, follow the city of Detroit with the fire departments, and then you guys are thriving and able to deliver a level of service that matches the pendulum swing in the city itself.
Yeah. And Detroit's its own thing compared to, Mike and I are working in the suburbs of Detroit, right? The city's one thing, the suburbs are a whole nother. And then getting a lot of these municipalities to work in sync together to help each other out as well is a part of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Manisha, you want to jump in with anything? I've just been yabbing for a moment.
No, you guys are right on the mark. I just think that there's a lot of things that we can't control, which makes it harder for all of us working in a field of service, in a field of wanting to be there for the people that we serve. And so I think understanding that there's things that we can't control, there's people that we can't control, and entities that we can't. I think that's where our compassion is, and where it's important to have a good leader, a strong leader, someone who has great listening skills and communication skills, and who's able to have 360 perspective on what could be happening with their members or what's happening in the community. Because unfortunately, it's not going to be our politicians and our governments that saves, cities and states and neighborhoods. It's going to be its people. So I think the more that we do the training and we give compassion and grace to people who actually do want to serve versus it being a business, we'll be good. We'll be good. It's definitely a fight that I'm willing to duke out. So
me too. Yeah. I always tell people, we used to send kids up chimneys and work in factories in Victorian times until people said enough is enough. Women couldn't vote until the suffragettes bound together. The Million Man March. I mean, all these events where people got angry enough. It doesn't mean they have to use violence, but they got angry enough to want to step up. All of a sudden, that one leader, that politician, that president, that union president, that fire chief, whoever it is, whatever that obstruction is, if there's enough of us, you just run right over them. So, to me, I always tell people I want to get them educated and angry. Once you understand that there is a solution, even financially, and you can illustrate, like the question I always ask, why do you not deserve to go home to your family after 42 hours? I mean, you literally save lives. You come from a dead sleep to getting on a rig to doing a primary search to then working a cardiac algorithm. And my barista stops at 40 hours, and I love my coffee. But, there is such an inequity there that we have to fix. And until our own people understand that it's not macho to work yourself into the grave, then hopefully we can bind together as a truly united fire service and start demanding a work week, because isn't that what a union's supposed to do fundamentally? The very first thing is work week, working conditions. So yeah, that's what I'd love to see in 2025.
Working conditions.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, Manisha, with you, we haven't got your background yet. So tell me where you were born, family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings?
Gotcha. Okay. So I was born in the absolute best city in the state of Michigan, which is Ann Arbor. And those who know anything about Ann Arbor, that is where the University of Michigan is. And so, yes, we are the state champs for 2023. So everything is football in this area. And yes, we are thrilled that our Lions are doing well. So born in Ann Arbor, my mother is actually from the South. So my mom moved to Michigan when her family did a little bit when she was younger. I think she was in high school. My dad is also not from the state of Michigan. He moved when his family moved for the auto industry. I think he moved a little earlier before high school, so maybe elementary school. But both of their families moved to Michigan for the opportunities that the auto industry brought to the state of Michigan. And so my family, they worked with GM and Ford and Chrysler, and we are an automotive family. So my family and most of their close friends, we are living on the backs of the blood, sweat, and tears of folks who've worked their lives in the automotive industry and built up this amazing area and state to what it is today. So I'm very proud about that. My mom is nothing short of a Marvel superhero. So just waiting for them to, bring her into one of the movies. But she's amazing. I have 3 siblings. And my mom raised us all pretty well and has done all she could do to take care of us. And my dad has done the same with some of the struggles that he has had. But I think has done the best with what he can do. And so I think it was pretty early on in my career in my childhood that I knew I was going to be of some sort of service. So it was going to be a couple different things. I wanted to be a dancer. So I was like, ooh, I'm going to totally dance in one of these music videos. And then I was like, I'm going to be an astronaut. And then I was like, okay, I can't dance and I'm so afraid of heights. So that's not going to work. Let me go ahead and do something else. And so I think I led towards social work because I lived a life where social workers were not effective. They came in and they made situations worse. And they did not do the things that they were supposed to do for family entities. And so I looked into social work, but surprisingly enough, I didn't want to do this traditional social work job. So I realized that I wanted to do some sort of medical type of space. So I found myself working with Wayne State pretty early on and got into trauma work. So I've been a trauma therapist for, I'm just going to say, quite a few years. I'm not even going to put the number on it because it makes me old. And so being a trauma therapist was hard. Deciding to honestly work with people who are some of the toughest to work with, people who have pretty complex medical conditions. And I will just say that having depression, anxiety, PTSD, trauma from childhood, all of that is a medical condition, just as you would with diabetes or anything else. And so I found myself not being able to shy away from the people who needed the help the most when a lot of my colleagues were like, yeah, I'm just going to stick to, mild to moderate cases or, stick with families or stick in with childhood, and all of that has its lane. But I think that for me, working with the folks who needed it the most was the challenge and honestly my calling. So I went that way and was blessed to have to start to work with Wayne State and Wayne Health and have an amazing team that I work with and a medical director It doesn't allow me not to be my best at any given time. And so when Frontline Strong Together came about, it was an opportunity that a lot of people wanted, but me, because I had first responders in my family, and I've seen the side effects. I am a child of military and first responder members in that family, and it's not a pretty picture when you see unresolved trauma, unresolved PTSD, people who refuse to get help for addiction and things like that. That plays out and spills onto your family, and it bleeds. And so, I was good. I was good on that until I was convinced by my own family and that this might be a calling, and I haven't looked back since. So I am blessed to do the work that I do with the people that I do it with. And I'm so honored to work with Geoff and Mike and these guys. I don't know. I'm just happy.
Yeah, that's a different leap. You went from doing clinical work to getting into FST5. That's a whole different thing.
Yeah. So I went from having, I went from doing kind of like a trauma therapist like schedule. And so I was working at some other programs and kind of helping start and train other trauma therapists at one point. But yeah, I went from having like, I don't know, 20 patients a day, not really, but having quite a few patients working over the 40 hours a week with trauma patients to having the state come and say, hey, you guys need to develop and start this program, and you need to do it from the ground up, and you need to learn all the best practices and do all the things, and then also implement your own expertise. And you need to do it.
Make it work for all 5 of the disciplines at the same time.
Make you work for all 5 of the disciplines to do other things. So it was not easy. It has not been easy. Every day is still kind of like we're still working through all of the twists and turns, the intricacies that make us who we are with all these 5 disciplines. And I'm actually really happy that I said yes, and I'm here, and we're doing this work. So it's not pretty, it's not sexy work, and it's not even rewarding work all the time, to be honest. But it's work that builds up my community, which builds up my city, which builds up my state, which means I'm leaving a legacy, and that's all I want to do. So,
well, I want to go back first. Speaking of trauma, is it killing you that Ohio State is going to the championships now?
It is. It is. And
we own them. Michigan,
4 years in a row, baby. That's all that matters to us.
It's the trauma of it all. And then even more so trauma where I have these people who are like, oh, but they're in the Big Ten. And I'm like, don't talk to me. I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Michigan's putting a lot of money in their players now. We're good.
Yes. So since I know a lot of people will see this podcast, I am for the Big Ten. But it will be a good national championship game.
my wife's an OSU fan, so I watched the last few games.
Oh, man.
The only time I've ever watched American football. I don't normally follow people throwing eggs around the field, but
I get it.
So your wife knows exactly what I was saying when I was born in the best city in the world.
Yeah, she was still gutted that they lost to Michigan. So even though they're in this point now, I think that's so
that's right there.
The bottom line is that Ryan Day, if you don't win this national championship, the fact that he hasn't beat us, I don't know. So
all right, well then, before we go back to the lads, just kind of building on your own story. As I progress through this podcast over the years, obviously I am a perpetual student, and then these kind of middle of the Venn diagram starts to show very, very powerfully. The impact of our youth on the first responder is rarely discussed. I mean, it is in your profession, but overall in our profession. Talk to me about the magnitude of the impact of year 0, even in vitro, up to when we get the badge pinned on our chest. Because one of the biggest mistakes I think that some of the voices out there are saying is, oh, well, you were at the World Trade Center, or you were at the Boston Marathon bombing. That's why you're struggling. And yet you hear the stories of so many first responders and military members, and you're like, oh, yeah, there's so much there. And if that wasn't addressed before you entered the job, doesn't mean you shouldn't be, but, I think left unaddressed is a dangerous thing. So talk to me
Oh, yeah.
about the prevalence of childhood trauma in the people that you counsel now.
Absolutely. I would say 90% of the first responders that come into this work have some sort of childhood trauma. And that does not make them actually a bad first responder. And I know that there's this negative connotation that comes with that, and then also stigma that comes with that. The reality is that the difference between the first responders who have childhood trauma and do well is that they have acknowledged it and they're getting work for it. And the person who hasn't acknowledged it is someone who could be struggling. And so I think it's important to understand that sometimes this work, the push to get into the first responder field as a firefighter, as a police officer, is because people are looking for an outlet. They're running from something. They're trying to get away from something sometimes. And being a hero or being someone who loves adrenaline, who wants to show people and maybe even others in their families that they're worthy, they can get into these type of fields and not understanding not only what the field is going to bring, but also not understanding that you don't necessarily, because healing is an ongoing process. So you don't have to be healed to get into any space. But if you don't even address some of the things that have happened in your childhood, just as a therapist, you're going to find yourself struggling and not being able to. So like the person that you mentioned before who had clutter everywhere, she was struggling. That person may have just been kind of like head above the water, trying to figure out their space and what they're doing. And we see this in both spaces of where it's just now becoming okay to talk about these things. Most departments, most first responder worlds were like, you don't talk about what's wrong with you. You deal with that later. Even in the military, you should be able to handle these things. You should be able to do the thing. Only the strongest survive. And then they kick you out of these systems. So you're no longer a firefighter. You're no longer a police officer. You're no longer Delta, Navy, like all these other, these high-ranking services, and they expect you to survive in the everyday world. And you don't know how to do so. And so I think that it is important. I love that we're in a space where we can talk more about mental health, but that won't be enough until we can just reduce or eliminate this stigma, because most people don't know that it didn't start with you coming into the work that you're doing. Most of it started before that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's tough.
It's weird that's the biggest thing I think I've learned entering this world, because I have zero education and training in any type of psychology, psychiatry, peer support. I'm like the podcast producer dude who also has a lot of teaching time in the general sense of fire and EMS. But I've learned the most is that, first of all, especially our younger generations, because they're younger, come in not knowing they've been affected throughout their life. Certainly, the younger humans in 2025 are much more self-aware because we talk about it more. They're growing up in a culture where you should say, yeah, I don't like this. Something's weird with me right now. Whereas you would have stuffed that away a long time ago. So when we talk to people that are, quote, having troubles, well, you're right. We see the general public's like, oh, you must have seen so much. It's like, well, I had all this stuff happen to me before I got there, and it's been exacerbated by this lifestyle, this job. And not only is the job hard, but it goes on 56 hours a week. I have a stay-at-home wife. I got 2 kids. I have to work another job to keep things going, and like everybody else. And then I get that little extra click of the reality of I get to see 4 people's worst day of their life before I've had lunch that day.
Yeah.
It's a lot of that. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the public just thinks it's a lot of the calls we go on, but they don't realize we all have a life at 8:00 when shift ends. And that life comes with life,
goods and bads,
traumas, good things, bad things, whatever it might be. And the next day when I show up, I have to tuck all that stuff away, and now I'm dealing with your problems.
And then you're up all night.
And yes. So I think it's one of those things where there's a culmination of a lot of things that go into the trauma that first responders really deal with. Is It's not one. There's not one road. There's a lot of paths that lead to it.
The trauma is a bucket, and
Yeah.
it accepts many different forms. Or backpack.
And to be honest, a lot of the stuff that we deal with on the peer support stuff isn't work stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff we deal with the peer support team is life.
Yeah, the exacerbation of life around the hard job.
Yeah.
But you can't be home enough so that you're having a problem with your wife, or your kids are sick and you still have to be at work. And.
Mm-hmm.
How often is the prevalence of mandatory overtime for you?
Yeah.
Depends on the department.
Yeah, it depends on the department.
Especially like what you see it the most is dispatchers and private EMS right now are just like, when you talk to private EMS people that come to my department now, we've had a few youngers, and they're like, yeah, I'm used to working the same amount of hours and making half the amount, blah, blah, blah. But they're not telling you is they're supposed to work 36 hours a week, 40 hours a week, and they're getting mandatoried up to 60 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
That's insane.
Dispatchers are real.
And dispatchers is like, not only in my 8-hour shift where they answer the call literally 500 times, I'm going to need you to stick around another 4. And then I need you to come back 8 hours later.
Yeah. I think this is the thing as well. I mean, I live this 56 hours a week, which, I think you guys are familiar. I think we talked about this when I was on your show, but it in itself is insanity, as we touched on earlier. Why is it not 40 hours a week like everyone else? Yeah. But then to have to phone your wife, your husband, and, tell your kids, hey, I can't come to Dad for Donuts. I've done nothing wrong. My management is so shit that once again, rather than filling these gaps with new firefighters, we're relying on us. And the analogy I use is that log PT that you see in, BUDS in the SEAL training. You're supposed to have 8 men on that log, and now there's 7, now there's 6, and you're still carrying it. So every time that someone's gone, you're having to work more and more. And the impact on the relationships and the shame and guilt that comes with that, that's just compounding it. And what drives me crazy is that the people that make these decisions, they go home at 5 o'clock, Monday to Friday. It doesn't affect them. So out of sight, out of mind. And I think that is completely disgusting, because not only is it our first responders' lives, it's their relationships. And even if you look at the science, the health of their offspring is affected. We have a much higher prevalence of pediatric cancers and Down syndrome and autism. So, this is so needed that we look at the work week, because, I'll get Manisha's perspective in a second, but I haven't had a person yet tell me anything other than sleep deprivation is directly related to insert all mental ill health, addiction, anxiety, depression, suicide ideation, all the things. So the evidence is all there, like we said. And if we're not fixing the root pillar of human health, which is sleep, then we're scratching at the surface if we just put an EAP piece of paper on a board and say, well, that's mental health fixed.
Absolutely. Sleep is ground zero. You have to be able to be in a space where you're getting healthy sleep. And I think that's probably the number one thing that all 5 of our disciplines are struggling with, is sleep. And it leads into so many other things, because your brain isn't able to properly work without being able to, we push it now because our brains are supercomputers. We push them and they're able to do these magical things, right? So you take that 2-hour nap, you're like, oh, okay, that's good. That's all I need. I'm going to go for another 16 hours. At some point, you're going to not be able to do that anymore. At some point, you're going to break down and you're going to stop. And so something as simple as like getting more sleep, or just getting better sleep, understanding your sleep hygiene and how do you get the most sound sleep whenever you can make a world of difference for our first responders and their families. But you're absolutely right. The first responder world does not just affect the first responder. It bleeds on its families. It bleeds on the children and everyone else around them. And so when we got into the space of creating this program, we wanted to make sure we included that. Like, that was super important to be able to make sure that this program also covered spouses, children, anyone else who's a close member to our first responders, because they have to go home, right? The stress, the trauma, one of the first times I met Mike, I think this was before he played a really bad trick on me, but one of the first times I met Mike is that he told me, he said, most people in their lives, only get that one worst day of your life, right? You only get one, like, I can't believe this happened, worst day of your life. And people spend their lifetime working through that. Firefighters and first responders, go through 20, 25 worst days of people's lives in a shift. And so if you times that by how long somebody has been in service, and then them needing to go home to their spouses and to their families, and then that's just putting that in that box. But then what happened? What has this person been through before they even got into the service? What is buried so low at the bottom before they even got to the service? The capacity of emotional kind of separation and kind of mentally blocking out certain things is top notch for our first responders, but it's also the key thing that's making life outside of the work unbearable. So that's why we're seeing high numbers of suicide later in the service years, soon after retirement, or once people are realizing that they can't do what they did in the first couple of years, not being able to hold their anger, not being able to hold their alcohol, not being able to do, just brush things off their shoulders like they once before. Now they're in a space where they don't have a capacity to even learn a skill to be able to, get themselves back to a safe and a healthy state of emotional regulation. And so the goal is to try to help people before it becomes too hard, before it becomes too late. In the state of Michigan, last November, so just a few months ago, in the month of November, we lost, I think it was a total of 6, Mike? First responders to suicide?
6 confirmed.
Yep,
Yeah.
6 confirmed. And so the highest that we've ever had in the state, the most that we've had in 1 month. And the reasons that we learned were all things that had someone had an opportunity to process probably years before, I think they would have been okay to be able to make it through the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back in that space. And so it's real. The struggle of not being able to handle things because you were taught how to handle them improperly. It's real, and it's super hard for first responders.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, I want to get to kind of your journey through, the mental health lens, and then we'll get to how you all came together. So as you progressed through your career, were there any personal struggles that led you into this? And then if not, what was your path into peer support, CISM, and then ultimately this?
I think there was a ton of struggles, actually. I mean, one of them was being how young I first started in all this. I was an EMT when I was 18, got my medic when I was 19, and you're dealing with stuff, your brain isn't even formed yet completely. And coming in at that time, it was, the old school mentality of you keep your mouth shut, you don't talk about it. And here I am 19 years old, and I'm in a world with 30, 40, 50-year-olds.
Not in Mayberry. You weren't working in Mayberry. He was working in a busy spot.
And, you're looking to them to see how do I do this? You know what I mean? And you see that, you kind of keep your mouth shut, you move on. But, going through, I remember 19, 20 years old having dead infants, dead kids, and not really knowing what to do with that, because 18, 19 years old, 20 years old, my friends, none of my friends understood what I did. They were going to college, they were going to college parties, they were doing these, this, that, and the other. And it was hard to talk to them about it because there was no realm of, they could not understand that kind of stuff. Right. Moving through that, even, I remember, back in 2015, my dad was diagnosed with leukemia. We almost lost him a couple times. And then, so going through that journey with him and seeing, how that affected him. If I wasn't at work, I was downtown, he was inpatient getting chemo, kind of seeing how that process goes. And you're on a floor with all people who are going through chemo. And, if I wasn't at work, I was up there with him. And, you come to the realization that your parents aren't going to be around forever. And it's a hard pill to swallow. But same deal, no idea how to talk about it, right? 2017 is when I had a run that really really screwed me up. It was I had a son back in 2015 as well, and he was born with a cleft lip and palate. So his first year, I mean, we had 2 major surgeries to repair his cleft lip and palate. He was on oxygen. He had an NG tube. I mean, we basically slept next to him with a BVM in case he stopped breathing. Multiple trips to the neonatal intensive care unit for failure to thrive. So I mean, that first year was, I just got through the leukemia with my dad. Then that happens. Then I have 2017. I had a run where a little girl, same age as my son, floating in a swimming pool, and that one was the one that got me. Like the other ones, I mean, we've had other ones, but that was the one that was like, we talk about, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And it was one of those things where I knew it got me more than the other runs, per se. There's 5 of us on the run. Nobody ever talked about it. I actually talk about it pretty freely now, but they had a clinician come in and talk to us, and this dude comes in. It's a low bid EAP. No idea what we do. Comes in, turns his chair around so he's going to sit like a cool guy and talk to me. And I start explaining the situation, and he looks at me. I mean, we're probably 5 minutes into this conversation, and he looks at me and goes, "Yeah, man, I totally understand." And at that point, I shut it down. I stood up. I'm like, "Hey, thanks for your time. There's no way you can understand pulling a kid out of a swimming pool, the same size as your son, the same age. There's no way." Right. And that's all we had. That was it. And I look around and see these other guys. They're, they seem like they were okay. Right. So now I'm starting to think, all right, well, what's wrong with me? Why is this getting me, type deal? And didn't go to talk to anybody about it. Things started progressing. You can't sleep. So then you start pouring some drinks, that type of thing. Took me down, I mean, a really, really dark path, pretty quickly, actually. And, eventually it was to a point where, you had the suicidal ideations and things like that. And it got to the point where it was like, all right, I do need to go get help. And so then we move on to the stress of trying to find a clinician, right? So I go see my first lady and I made that lady cry. Like I'm handing her the Kleenex box, like, hey, it's going to be all right, type thing, looking like, do I get my money back here? Cause like, I'm counseling you now. Then I had another guy who just wanted nothing but war stories, and it finally on the 4th try, I found my person. We connected. It was something that the personalities connected. And she really helped me through a lot of that stuff. And it was a lot. It wasn't just that run, but it was unpacking a lot of that stuff that happened also, because it was all within years of each other. But I do remember sitting in her office one time, and it was pretty early on, around when peer support started becoming a thing with the IAFF. And she asked me, she goes, well, what about, if you talk to other firefighters about your struggles and stuff? I started laughing at her. I said, that'll never happen. I go, they'll laugh me out of the building. Right. And she goes, why can't you do that? I go, because we don't do that. The stigma that's attached to it, but that type of deal. And I remember leaving that office, and it was one of those things where, like, I knew the system was screwed up, because I knew a lot of dudes who were like me. And I remember driving one day, I was riding Ashley the Rescue with the same guy who was on that run with me. And he looked at me and said, he told me he was going to see a therapist over that run. And I looked at him, and it felt like 3,000 pounds were taken off my shoulders, because I wasn't the only person who had problems with it. You didn't feel alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you had like this self-imposed weight in your backpack.
Yes.
Right? Because you didn't know you could share that weight.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now him and I are talking about it, and it made me feel a lot better. So then it started kind of like, okay, maybe there is something to this peer support stuff, you know? And I told myself, I'm not a huge like religious guy, but I told myself, I go, if this is something that I'm supposed to do, there'll be a sign, right? And I remember sitting at a union meeting probably 6 months later, and our delegation had come back from the IFF convention. And this is when peer support was just getting started. And I remember at the union meeting, they're like, hey, we heard about this peer support stuff. Is there, we're wondering if anybody would want to start it. And I remember sitting in the meeting and it was like that,
here we go.
That's it. It's like, there's your sign.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And so it was one of those things where it was like, okay, this is what I've been looking for. This is the sign I was kind of looking for. And so I raised my hand and said, I'll start it. I'll do it. And we started our program with 12 individuals, and it's been going on now for 7 years. It was something that we grew from the bottom up, grassroots. I mean, it was boots on the ground. That's where we started. And a lot of it, the team that I had around me is really what made it happen. I can't say enough about the team. And from there, it really grew because we just started, we had a real honest conversation about what were all the barriers that we ran into to getting help for mental health. And we just started checking them off. Okay, how do we fix this? How do we fix this? It was like you talked about, when enough people had enough of whatever's going on, all right, if you're not going to fix it, then we are. And that's really kind of how our peer team made ourselves what we are today, is just that, is we see the system's broke. We know it's not going to get any better, so we're going to make it better. From there, I still go to therapy today. I still go to therapy once a week and see the same therapist. But, since then, there's other things. My dad got leukemia again, which he's in remission from that, but then got a different type of cancer. Been through a divorce. But because of those things, when these things happened, I was set up for success. I wasn't set up for failure. And so it's really kind of building that resiliency that has helped move that kind of journey along. And that's when, the MPFFU started a behavioral health committee for all of Michigan. Hey, I'll join that. I remember seeing, and that's actually how I met Geoff. Was they were doing
yeah, I'm like a podcast nerd. So like when I got in education years and years ago, I got good at, I guess, digital media in a sense. I mean, it's 2020 something, right? You're going to be good at digital media. So I've been doing like videos and audio for over 10 years. And then I got into the podcast game when a group I was working for needed to get information out about the pandemic to over 4,000 of our paramedics. And then the Michigan Professional Firefighters Union, which is our state representation of the IFF, said, hey, you want to do a podcast with us? Yes, let's do it. And then I kind of became a podcast guy doing a bunch of them. And then Mike hit me up like, hey, what do you think about doing one about mental health for this Frontline Strong Together 5 program? And I'm like, sure, I don't know anything about it. I'm probably need the help too. We should probably talk. So, and then he introduced me to Manisha. And that's when my education really started. Mike kind of opened up to me about his story. And then he's talking, and then I'm being flooded with all my memories. Like, I wonder how much of my personality has been affected by not only my growing up, but also growing up in the fire service. Because like Mike, I started at 19, right? I was real young, just like him. And you start to see these things in a broader perspective. And then you start playing all the stories in your head, like the thousands of conversations I've heard around a firehouse where a guy's talking. I'm like, this guy's going through a divorce. This guy's got cancer. This other one lost a father. This other one did. And you start seeing all these instances and remembering all these times when somebody needed not just a shoulder, they needed resilience. And they needed a community around them to build it and make sure they knew what that was on day one. So that the backpack we carry that we're putting in rocks in every day, we're offloading that thing on a regular basis. So we're not breaking the straps off. So
that's a big, yeah. I've for so many years, it was, nobody wanted to talk about mental health because it was the elephant in the room. You know what I mean? And
you couldn't with anybody making fun of you. Even the people that needed it were the ones making fun of you.
Yes.
Let's be honest.
Absolutely.
Right?
And when we started our peer support team, we thought we were going to get laughed out. We thought we were going to get laughed out of the fire service. And within our first year, we had over 300 or 400 contacts.
What year was it?
This was probably 2019 is when we started it.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, we haven't had a year yet where we've had under 350 to 400
and how many
contacts.
And how many people are you servicing there? That's your department, correct?
No, that's all departments in Southeast Michigan.
Okay. Yeah. Because you guys are handling. Yeah. So Mike's done a great job of like leading the way of building this non-official network in a lot of ways. Official, non-official, right?
Yeah. And really how it started was we were all starting peer support teams at the same time. And there was no, years ago, there was no like, this is how you start a team.
Yeah.
Like, this is how you do this. There was no standardized anything. So when you would run into another team, we would just network with each other. Hey, what's working good with you guys? Well, what's working good with us? And that's how we kind of built this network throughout the state of peer teams was, hey, you know what? I like that idea. I'm going to take that idea. Oh, well, I like this idea from your team. I'm going to take that idea. And that's really how the kind of the genesis of how these teams came together happened. And then when Frontline Strong came about, we never really had a centralized anything for mental health support in the state. That's where Frontline Strong came in, and it was like this centralized force where we can organize under one umbrella and
on
really,
behalf of all the
first
five
responders
and their immediate family members, because they're on the team too.
Yeah.
If I'm getting mandatory overtime, my wife's on the team that day. You know what I mean? She's taking care of the house or whoever else I need to be because I can't be there that day.
Yeah.
Well, Manisha hit on a point that I think really needs to be the next phase when it comes to talking about mental health in the fire service, which, we talked about stigma, and 10 plus years ago, absolutely, that was a pertinent conversation. And we were calling everything PTSD. And now fast forward to 2025, we understand PTSD versus moral injury. We're talking about sleep deprivation, all these other things that need to be discussed. Where I think we've fallen short, and this is obviously just nationally, is that we're stuck on stigma. Like I say, we got the trouser leg stuck on stigma, and we're not talking about post-traumatic growth and the hope that comes with that. I truly believe that unaddressed childhood trauma becomes a fracture in the foundation. But once it's addressed, once it's worked through, that becomes resilience. I think that's truly the definition of resilience. We have these classes and people are shouting and they're going through collapse mazes and stuff. That's not resilience, in my opinion. It's whatever you struggle with, whether you've addressed it before or whether you address it today, that is really what makes you a great first responder, because now you can be more empathetic. Now you have that strength. You can deal with some of these calls that maybe would have challenged you before. So talk to me about the formation of Frontline Strong Together, and then let's talk about the barrier to entry. Because, for example, one huge one is cost. Another one is the availability of a culturally competent clinician. So talk to me about the formation and what are these solutions that you're offering the Michigan first responders and their families so they can work through these struggles and become even better first responders, putting hope in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was about 2020 that we got word that Frontline Strong Together was a go. And so a little bit of background on how the program got started is we have some pretty major heavy-hitting unions. So we worked with the POAM, which is the Police Officers Association of Michigan, MPFFU, Michigan Professional Firefighters Union, and Fraternal Order of Police, which is FOP. And so we had these folks with other lobbyists come and say, hey, we need to provide something more than EAPs for our members. So something more than just, go to your EAP or go to talk to someone for disciplinary actions. We need to find something for actual mental health support and behavioral health support because people are struggling. And so we got this amazing grant that is funded by the state of Michigan that has tasked us to offer services for police, firefighters, EMS, 911 dispatch, and corrections to all 83 counties in the state of Michigan, which is this is the first time anything like this has ever been done. And so when you get that thrown on your lap and that's the only direction you get, you kind of have to like get in and figure out where you go. And so first thing we learned on the Wayne Health side, so we work with two different entities here. We have a 24/7, 365 call center, which is also a space. I know that there's 988 and there's other suicide prevention lines, but this is the first time that the state has had its own first responder call line. And so a call line where a first responder can call and say, hey, I'm struggling today. I just need someone to talk to, all the way to, hey, I've had to switch my schedule. My wife's schedule hasn't changed. We need to find evening daycare in our area. Can you help us find it? All those resources can be found on this line. To make it even better, it's manned by part-time and retired first responders. So you're going to talk to a first responder as well. And then also managed by people who have the same degrees as myself. So like clinicians who can help within the crisis moments. We can take calls all the way from suicide calls all the way, again, to something super simple and just needing a resource. And so that's 24/7, 365. Manned by a state program called MyCal and operated by a program in Oakland County called Common Ground, and they're pretty amazing. And so that has been one of the things that have helped us because sometimes people just need to find a call space. But within that 24/7, 365 crisis line, we found that peer support is the biggest thing. A lot of people, once they hear mental health or behavioral health, and the distinction between the two in this program is that behavioral health really focuses on the addiction. It focuses on substance, things like that, behavioral type things that need to change. And so we kind of like to have that distinction because two reasons. One, unfortunately, our insurances have got a hold of these words that are triggers. And so what we'll find is that insurance will say, we'll cover this amount of behavioral health and this amount of mental health, but we won't cover them both in the same space. And so we want people to understand that there is a distinction between the two. And our goal is to make sure that we can help you find the right coverage that you need. So that's important. But peer support is huge. So what we found is that it was important to identify who's doing what in all 83 counties and have a central place on our website and within our phone call that our phone line where people can call and say, I need to talk to someone who's in the same field as me, who's not in the same department as me, but who can understand what I have going on. Can you connect me with that person? And you can either call our call line or go to our website and you can find a peer support network within your area, within your zone. Now, Mike is fancy enough to where people just call him directly, but we try to not have that be the burden of our individual members, is to have people calling them directly all the time. So we encourage people to come to our website where they can find peer supporters in their area. But I think the single thing that makes our clearinghouse, which is our website, so spectacular is that we have a list that's actively being updated of culturally competent clinicians. Now, this is important because, as I mentioned earlier, you don't just want to send a first responder to somebody who says, oh, I'm a trauma therapist or I'm a depression expert, and they have no experience working with a first responder. They may be amazing at the work that they do, but you have to understand the culture of working with first responders. And the beauty about this is that you can integrate yourself in that culture and you can learn how to work with first responders, but you're not going to know it right off the bat. So we took our time learning this, kind of went through the ringer. Mike and his team made me have my first panic attack ever because they tried to trap me in a burning building. Well, okay, so that's my trauma.
No, it was fake.
That's my trauma talking. That's what happened in my mind.
It wasn't actually a burning building.
That's my trauma talking. But actually, it was an experience. I had to come through and I did some training with the guys and actually with all 5 disciplines. And that's one of the things that we promote is doing ride-alongs, learning how to learn more about the culture, learning more about your city and your county. How are the municipalities servicing which areas in those areas so that you can understand, like, okay, so people in the city, firefighters in the city of Detroit will have in a 24-hour a 24-hour shift probably is going to have more calls than maybe City of Romeo, right? So it's a smaller place, things like that, and actually see a lot more things, and actually maybe even have a lot more fires. And so understanding where the city in which the first responders you're trying to serve is going to be huge. Understanding the first responders that you're going to work with is going to be huge, and then also understanding how, just like you mentioned, their childhoods kind of feed into that space. And that's going to be different than someone who has not had the same experiences. That's going to be different than someone who's like, oh, I have childhood trauma, but that isn't, since then I've been okay. I've been great. Haven't seen anything significant. Haven't ran into anything. My family's doing good. Everyone's healthy. Guarantee you how you treat that person is going to be very different than how you treat a firefighter. And so that's just a few of the small things that I think, because I'm super excited about this program that we do. But I think I've maybe covered some of the most important things that we do outside of probably the most exciting thing we do, which is our podcasts, because it is the way that the people communicates with Frontline Strong Together, which is also known as FST5. And so we'll make sure that we put contact information so that you guys can see and learn more about the program. But yeah, I'll let the guys talk about Minds on the Frontline, because this is probably including our webinar that we do, which is not as exciting, although it's going to be in 2025. We do a live webinar as well. But we found that our podcasts and our webinars and our education trainings is the way that people communicate with us, is the way that we learn as we're doing what people are struggling with, what people need, and adjusting in real time. So this isn't a situation where we're like, oh, we have this and then it's going to take us 16, years to create a new program. No, people need help now. So we're going to these places, we're talking to people in real time, and then next month and 2 months, we've created a space where people can have a dialogue or have access to a new treatment, a new training, and that's the beauty of what we do. So
beautiful.
Yeah, it's been really, and again, underscoring the fact that being a firefighter, paramedic for so long, but also an instructor, facilitator, seeing these things come together where FST5 has produced a giant network where they offer the big three. Number one is the giant message of we need to decrease the stigma by talking to it and just having each other. You got to have a network, your literal social network, whether that's your friends, your family, hopefully the non-first responders in your life that you keep close to you so they normalize you. And then you also need access to peer supporters, people that have a little bit more training on you and you got something going on. And then you also need access to culturally competent clinicians and treatments that are actually going to be beneficial to you. And when you have a network of all of those working together for all five and their families, we're seeing tremendous benefits. Now, we're still going to have problems. This program's not going to fix them. It's not designed to fix it. It's designed to be a safety net for when the things we know are going to happen, the human beings that operate our systems and the human beings that maintain a healthy life with those human beings, those frontline workers, are going to break down at some point, whether it's physical, financial, or emotional. And we have to be here to protect them and help them. And one of the biggest benefits of Frontline is bringing all this together increases the scope, the N of the people that are working on it. So that's the more people are being affected. That's also more brains working on a problem. That's more piles of things coming together to fix these things and to help a greater cause. And I think we're seeing Michigan, which is a very big state, got two parts. They got an upper peninsula and lower. It's a pretty big state. It's a big world, but it's becomes a small world, but a big neighborhood where we're all like, I feel like we're more in it together in Michigan, especially me learning from Frontline Strong in the last 2 years and then doing the podcast and talking about so many people about the different things is we're shrinking the problem by staring at it and dissolving the stigma and then making people realize it's cool to admit you got something to work on. And then here's who you should call. And then let us help you with the price. It's all the things.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you quickly, because this is, I think, a big part of this conversation. When people ask me, people approach me from, companies and say, I want to help first responders, who's an organization that ties you all together? And I'm like, no one. And it's just the hard truth. I wish that the union brought us all together and disseminated the information that we need, and had a unified, standardized professional work week, all those kind of things. But we just don't. I see, honestly, there's Chiefs organization and there's FDIC and all these things, but we're still extremely siloed. And having worked East Coast, West Coast, and back to East again, arguably one of the richest and one of the poorest departments, one of the best and one of the worst. I'll leave everyone to kind of figure out which is which. I got an interesting perspective of the fire service, nationally, and I realized that there's a lot of ego, a lot of narcissism. Oh, well, city doesn't talk to county, PD doesn't talk to FD, which again, insert Uvalde, lesson learned, make sure that you're not one of those people. But this is a barrier to growth, innovation, progress. Even like I said, that the simple, why do our firefighters work 56? The amount of pushback I get from that. Oh, it'll never happen. Oh, it's just justification of apathy rather than, actually forging a moral journey for your people and fixing some of these issues that are literally sending you to funerals. So what was it that was different in Michigan that brought all these counties together so that you could bring this as an actual statewide initiative?
Dr. A and a pile of money.
Well, I think it was
honestly, you had a big, huge brain and a guy with a lot of pull who can see the future, man. Dr. A is awesome.
I think that's part of it. I think on the other part of it, as peer teams, we were already kind of doing it a little bit.
Yeah.
We were already our own network, basically.
You guys showed that the investment was worth the time.
Yes. But the problem we had seen years before that is we'd have programs like Frontline, but then there was an agenda. There was, you know what I mean?
Or a narcissist running it, or an ego in the way.
And they were kind of like flash in the pan things. Like they started out hot and heavy and then they would fade out. And we all kind of kept in touch with one another and had our own kind of network. And we even had like mutual aid agreements. You know what I mean? Something happens at your department, you're going to call me, or those types of things. So we had it, but we never had anything to bind us together or that centralized thing. So when we saw Frontline Strong come together with Dr. A,
the right people,
and money and the right people, and we saw that one of the biggest things that we saw with Frontline was every program prior to that was clinicians telling us what we needed. Okay, who had no idea what we did. Where Frontline started was tell us what you guys need. They took the approach of we don't know what we don't know, and we need you guys to teach us. Let's take our clinical world, let's take your first responder world, let's melt them together, and then we'll get what we need. And that was the difference with this program and why it works so well, is that they put their egos aside, right? We made ourselves vulnerable and said, hey, these are our problems, this is what we need. They made themselves vulnerable. Hey, I don't know everything, even though I got a doctor in front of my name. And we sat down and had real conversations. And sometimes they were uncomfortable conversations where, hey, we're going to do this. And us as first responders looked at them and were like, yeah, it's not going to work. and they
were smart enough to listen.
But they were smart enough to listen. But vice versa, where we said, hey, we want to do this. And they come in and go, well, that's not how this works. We have to do it this way. So it's a learning thing. But that is really how this all came about, was we had certain things already in place. We just didn't have the money, we didn't have the resources, we didn't have any of these things. Yeah. Whereas when Frontline came in, it was a beautiful marriage between these two sides.
And it could have gone south real quick if you didn't have the right people running it who didn't put the priority of seeking to understand first. If that wasn't the priority, they would have come up with a plan of we're going to do X, Y, and Z. They'd have dumped money in it, a couple of events would have happened, and it would have failed. But they took the time to listen and say, okay, what is it you think you need? What is going on? What is actually affecting these humans? Then they came up with a plan or a treatment plan essentially for the state. And that's, Manisha, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of what you do as a clinical therapist is you listen, and then you come up with a treatment plan. You don't just say, oh, that hurts, do this, right?
You got it.
Yep.
I definitely would say that's how, we had to do something different. So I think that We are continuing to learn a lot from our guys. It's painful, but
yeah. What's interesting is that, we have a really good program. We have all the best people, and still,
absolutely so good.
the stigma still exists to where people don't even know about it in Michigan. And we talk about this thing. I work with people at a department that's only about 80 people, and there's still people there, and I talk a lot, that don't know about the program. So I can only imagine, right? And so there's all these people right now we're trying to reach to make sure they know they're not alone. Mm-hmm. They're not. And that's one of the big things about the podcast that we do. So Minds on the Front Line is like this outreach arm, this beacon, this lighthouse of, hey, come here. Look, we have the information for you. We have some answers for you if you want them, and we're not forcing anything on you. But we want everybody to know with a giant megaphone that they're not alone.
Absolutely.
I think that you're right. I think that's one of the biggest things when we started this podcast. That's what it was about. It was, for many years, we didn't talk about this stuff. And it takes people who have gone through some things to talk about it and have that vulnerability to talk about it. And we have a lot of guests on here who have gone through some things. Their parents have committed suicide, or they've gone through substance use, or they've gone through these things. And it's a lot of them, it's the first time they may have talked about it with anyone. And if you can create that space that they feel safe enough to where they can have those conversations and they can be human and be vulnerable, that's what I think we look at is hopefully somebody who's listening to that podcast goes, wow, that sounds a lot like me. Like, I'm not messed up. Like, this isn't something that's, a life sentence. I can get through this type of stuff. And, it's been kind of cool. We've had a couple episodes where people have got a hold of us after the episode, especially with the suicide episodes, and said, hey, I thought about killing myself back in blah, 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 blah. And, I really appreciate your podcast, that type of thing. And that was really, one of the things that we talked about when we first started this podcast was if we could get one person to listen to it and still be here, then this podcast was totally worth it. And we've seen that tenfold. Yeah. So that's really why we really started this, was making it okay and having that arena where people can listen to it and go, okay, there's nothing wrong with me. This is,
right. Just a couple dummies with a mic.
Yeah.
Nobody special.
A couple dudes who've driven down the road,
yeah.
And we're still here. And, and our guests are phenomenal who come on and that I think helps people as well, as you have that vulnerability.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, just one more quick question before we wrap up, because I know we're mindful of your time. When it comes to barriers to entry, one big one is simply, and we even touched on insurance, the cost of a mental health counselor. A lot of these people are out of network. It's like $100, $150 a session. How are you addressing that issue?
So, go ahead. Do you want to go?
I can start a little bit. So there's a couple different things. Number one, we got to remember that not all frontline workers have insurance.
I don't,
right?
By the way.
Frontline, right. So if you don't have insurance and you are a volunteer sheriff up north Michigan, and your primary job is in the whatever industry up there, you might not have the insurance that covers this. Oh, but I'm a frontline worker. Yeah, you're a volunteer. So you're still a frontline worker, but you don't have the means to access it. Now you get somebody like me who's got the $30 copay because I got great insurance and I found somebody in network. $30 still adds up once a week. And let's say somebody else in my family needs it too. It gets real expensive. So one of the things they're doing through Wayne Health is they're covering the copays for you through the grant funding. So now I can go to a very good culturally competent clinician that's from the system that we're working with and go to them and eliminate the copay. Fantastic. And then there's a couple other options.
So there's also certain peer teams throughout the state that have started their own 501c3s and get donations, and their peer teams will actually help pay for people to go to treatment. They do fundraisers, have a bank account, and that's what that bank account is for, is to help first responders go to treatment. And then one of the other things, I've been a huge proponent, is a lot of other states have it, is a mental health presumption bill, where, in Michigan, we have a cancer presumption bill that says, hey, guess what? If you're a first responder, guess what? You're probably going to get cancer. So we're going to pay for your treatment. We know sleep deprivation, the schedule, the trauma, the whatever it may be. None of us leave this career how we walked into it because of these things. And why isn't our mental health covered by, I don't care what insurance, if you don't have insurance, I don't give a shit either way. Why isn't this stuff covered? We're covering cancer. We know cancer's killing people. Well, so is our mental health stuff. So that's one thing I would, before I leave this earth, I would love to see a mental health presumption bill here in Michigan that just covers it. So no first responder, whether it be volunteer, part-time, career, whatever it may be, has no worries on whether, I'm going to go to therapy this week or am I going to buy groceries?
Yeah.
Because to me, that's atrocious.
Yeah, everything's getting expensive too.
Yeah.
Well, like I've said to my military, guests, we don't have a VA for the first responders. So when I worked out after 14 years to just try and, help the fire service, I don't get any benefits. I don't have health insurance. I have nothing, and I'm a self-employed. So I don't know if anyone's self-employed out there trying to get health insurance. It's like, you're not going to be able to afford it. And that's fine. It's not, I'm absolutely fine. But it shows just, if I was struggling and I needed to go see someone, it would be hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And even sadly, with the presumption laws, a number of horror stories I've heard, which has been illustrated by this whole healthcare conversation that's happened after that murder. But people, friends of mine have literally heard insurance companies say, well, we're just going to fight it till they die anyway. So even when there's a presumption law in place, doesn't mean that person's actually going to get the help.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And really, the insurance companies, if they took care of it, they would be dishing out less money.
Yep.
It's actually a cost saver.
But then you'd have to look at that over time, over multiple careers of people that don't get to show their quarterly earnings to their boss to get their raise.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't get the big health change. We get these quarterly increments that don't actually help anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that makes us a little bit different is that when we work with culturally competent clinicians throughout the state, we can't, the program can't actually pay the clinicians to work with our first responders. We're trying to figure out better ways to make this happen. But we have agreements with them where they can help to reduce the costs. So if they're like, hey, I don't take this person's insurance, but I can, charge this person $15 for a 45-minute session versus, the $150 or something like that. We work with a lot of different clinicians and clinics that can give us kind of those spaces. But it's not enough. It's not nearly enough. And so our goal is going to be to continue to train people who want to do this work and who love it so much that they would do it for free if they could. And so this is our goal, is to make our state healthy and eventually our country.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, I think what you're doing in Michigan is amazing. It's been such an amazing conversation. For people listening, where are the best places to find the podcast and Frontline Strong Together?
Awesome. Go ahead, guys.
FST5, FST5.org will get you to the website. It's an amazing resource. I had nothing to do with it. Neither did Mike. Manisha and her team took care of this website, did an amazing job. And then also look up Minds on the Front Line on YouTube or any other podcast platform. We do a full video podcast. We put it on YouTube weekly. We do clips every day. We like to do one piece of content every single day where we do a clip from our podcast that's 30 to 60 seconds long. So please check our stuff out. It's great.
We're on Facebook, Instagram. You can check us out anywhere there. That's where we post our clips every day.
Yep. You can get full episodes on YouTube. Yeah.
YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, anywhere you get your podcast.
Yep.
And check out the one with James Gearing in it. He's pretty good.
Yeah, it's a pretty good episode.
Great episode. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for having us, James. This has been great.
Yeah, I want to thank you so much. I mean, not only just hearing your stories and your kind of call to service and all the different, hats that you're wearing, but again, being thought leaders in the formation of this, hopefully this will be, a blueprint that other states will look at and start applying as well. Because as we've touched on in so many different veins, our first responders are phenomenal human beings. Their families are phenomenal human beings. So we owe it to them to turn it around. And I think with this lens on our community at the moment, with all the incredible things they're doing out in North Carolina and now California, I think that the public eye is there, and this is the time for us to really kind of educate them on the deficits and then what needs to change. So I want to thank you all so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thanks for having us, and thanks for what you've been doing for years.
Yeah, stay on the gas, man.
Yeah.
Your people are listening. Stay on the gas.